Hagar, PBUH, known in Islam as Hjar, stands as one of the most powerful symbols of unwavering faith and courage in human history. Her story begins not in comfort or glory, but in abandonment, testing the very limits of human endurance and belief. When Prophet Ibrahim, S.A.S., was commanded by Allah to leave Hagar and her infant son Isma'il, S.A.S., in the barren valley of Makkah, there was no city, no people, no source of water, only silence and scorching desert winds. It was a divine command that seemed impossible to comprehend, yet both Ibrahim and Hagar submitted with complete trust. This submission, this surrender to the divine is what makes her one of the greatest women ever honored in Islam. As Ibrahim A.A.S. prepared to leave, Hagar's heart trembled with confusion and fear. She called after him, asking why he was leaving her alone in such a desolate place. When he did not respond, she asked, "Has Allah commanded you to do this?" And when he nodded, her heart immediately found peace. She said, "Then he will not forsake us." Those words defined her destiny and became a timeless testimony of faith. She was not a woman of despair, but a believer whose trust in Allah overpowered the fear of loneliness, hunger, and death. Days passed, and the scorching desert drained her strength. The food and water Ibrahim had left soon ran out, and the cries of her thirsty baby pierced the air. Desperation might have overwhelmed any ordinary mother, but Hagar refused to surrender to hopelessness. She began running back and forth between the two hills of Safa and Marwa, searching desperately for any sign of life, any glimmer of mercy. Her heart was breaking, but her faith never wavered. Each step she took became an act of worship, a living prayer echoing through the sands of time. When she reached her limit, when her body could no longer carry her, Allah's mercy descended. The ground beneath her son's tiny feet burst open, and from that dry desert, pure water began to flow, the sacred Zamzam spring. It was not just a miracle to quench thirst, it was a divine response to faith. In that moment, Allah showed humanity that no one who trusts in Him is ever truly abandoned. Through one woman's tears and patience, the barren land of Makkah became a place of life, and her struggle became a symbol of divine compassion. Her faith transformed not only her own destiny, but the destiny of nations. From the lineage of her son Isma'il, A.S. came the final prophet, Muhammad's PBUH, and through her sacrifice, the holiest city on earth was established. The place where she once ran in desperation is now sanctified by millions of Muslims who perform the sa'i during Hajj and Umrah, walking between Safa and Marwa in remembrance of her courage. Each pilgrim who walks those 7 circuits relives her story, honoring her strength, her motherhood, and her surrender to Allah's will. Hagar PBUH teaches humanity that faith is not proven in comfort, but in struggle. She did not wait for signs, she believed before she saw. She did not question why Allah placed her in hardship. She trusted that within her pain lay His wisdom. Her story reminds every believer that when all paths are closed, Allah can open one from the most impossible place. Her life embodies tawakkul, complete reliance on Allah, and shows that divine help often arrives when human strength ends. In every drop of Zamzam water, her faith still speaks. In every pilgrim step between the hills, her courage lives on. Hagar's journey was not merely a story of survival, it was the awakening of a spiritual truth. That true faith begins when reason ends, and that those who trust in Allah, even in the darkest desert, will always find a spring of mercy waiting beneath their feet. Hagar's PBUH story is one of the most heart-rending and inspiring examples of a mother's endurance in human history. Her experience in the scorching valley of Makkah stands as a timeless symbol of devotion, strength, and unshakable faith in Allah's mercy. When Prophet Ibrahim's A.S. was commanded by Allah to leave Hagar and their infant son Isma'il's A.S. in the barren desert, there was no visible sign of life, no water, no shade, no vegetation, and no human soul in sight. The order seemed impossible to comprehend, yet Hagar's heart accepted it because she understood that Allah's wisdom surpasses human reasoning. When she asked Ibrahim whether this was Allah's command, his silence was enough. Upon hearing his confirmation, she uttered the words that echo through the centuries, "Then Allah will not abandon us." As Ibrahim's AS departed, the reality of her situation began to unfold. The blazing sun scorched the sand beneath her feet, and the silence of the desert became heavy. She nursed her baby and prayed, holding on to faith as her only companion. Soon the water she carried was gone, and her milk began to dry up. The cries of baby Isma'il pierced her soul, filling the valley with the sound of desperation. Every instinct in her heart urged her to act, to find relief for her child. That maternal instinct side between Safa and Marwa. It is not merely a reenactment, but a living reminder of her endurance. Each step proclaims that faith is proven in struggle, that a mother's love can move mountains, and that Allah never forsakes those who put their trust in him. Hagar's journey turned the harshness of the desert into the birthplace of mercy, and her legacy continues to whisper to every soul that in every test, no matter how impossible, Allah's help is nearer than we think. The story of Hagar, PBUH, and her son Isma'il, AS, stands as one of the most moving and miraculous episodes in Islamic history, a moment when human endurance met divine mercy in the heart of a barren desert. When Prophet Ibrahim, AS, was commanded by Allah to leave his wife Hagar and their infant son in the empty valley of Makkah, he obeyed without hesitation, trusting in the divine wisdom that lay beyond his understanding. Hagar, though initially confused and heartbroken, asked him, "Did Allah command you to do this?" When he replied yes, she uttered the words that would echo through history, "Then he will not abandon us." With this unshakable faith, she faced the desert's cruelty alone. Days passed, and the water Ibrahim, AS, had left for them soon ran out. Under the scorching Arabian sun, baby Isma'il cried in thirst, and Hagar's heart broke with every tear he shed. Unable to bear his cries, she began running between two nearby hills, Safa and Marwa, desperately searching for help, water, or even a sign of life. She ran back and forth 7 times, embodying the purest form of a mother's love and struggle. This act, born out of desperation and trust in Allah, would later be immortalized as the ritual of Say in Hajj and Umrah, performed by millions of Muslims every year, symbolizing faith, persistence, and divine deliverance. As her strength waned and her hope faded, Hagar stopped beside her baby, weeping and praying. Then, by the mercy of Allah, a miracle occurred. The earth beneath Isma'il's tiny feet trembled, and a spring burst forth, the blessed water of Zamzam. Hagar immediately built a small basin around the spring to contain it, calling out, "Zamzam, Zamzam," meaning stop, stop, so that the water would not flow away. Her prayer had been answered, not with a mere drop of water, but with a continuous fountain that has flowed for thousands of years, never drying up, never losing its purity. The Zamzam spring became a symbol of divine providence, a testament that Allah's mercy is limitless and his help arrives in the most unexpected ways. With the emergence of Zamzam, the once lifeless valley of Makkah began to change. Passing tribes, noticing birds flying over the area, a sign of water, came to investigate and discovered Hagar and her child near the spring. They asked her permission to settle nearby, and she graciously agreed on the condition that the water remain under her care. Through this humble beginning, a community grew around the mother and child, and the foundations of Makkah were laid. From this barren land, destined for nothing, Allah brought forth life, prosperity, and a legacy that would shape the destiny of nations. Years later, Prophet Ibrahim's AS returned to reunite with his family. Together with his son Isma'il, AS, now grown, he was commanded by Allah to build the Kaaba beside the spring of Zamzam, a sacred sanctuary for worship. Thus, from the tears of a mother and the cries of a child rose the holiest site in Islam, the center of monotheism, where believers from all corners of the earth would turn their faces in prayer. Hagar's unwavering faith transformed what seemed like tragedy into the birth of an eternal legacy. Her endurance was not merely a personal victory, but a divine plan unfolding through her patience. Every drop of Zamzam reminds the world that faith can turn despair into hope and isolation into greatness. Today, millions of pilgrims drink from the same blessed spring, walk between the same hills, and remember the woman whose trust in Allah changed the course of human history. Hagar's story is proof that when faith is pure, even the harshest desert becomes a cradle of divine mercy and an everlasting sign of Allah's grace. Hagar's story is one of the most profound examples of how divine reward is born from human struggle. Her journey from despair to divine grace is not only a historical event, but a living symbol of faith's power to transform pain into purpose. When Prophet Ibrahim, ZAS, was commanded by Allah to leave his wife Hagar, PBUH, and their infant son Isma'il, AS, in the barren valley of Makkah, it was not an act of neglect, but an act of obedience to divine wisdom. At that time, Makkah was an empty desert, no water, no vegetation, no human life. Yet Ibrahim trusted Allah's command, and Hagar accepted her fate with unshakable faith, asking only one question: did Allah order you to do this? When Ibrahim replied, yes, she responded with serenity: then he will not abandon us. Those words captured the essence of tawakkul, absolute trust in Allah, even when the circumstances seem impossible. As the days passed, the food and water they had brought were exhausted. Hagar's heart ached as her baby cried from thirst. No mother could bear such pain. Driven by desperation and love, she ran between the hills of Safa and Marwa searching for help, hoping to see a caravan or a sign of water. Her 7 runs were not in vain. They were recorded by the heavens. That act of seeking, fueled by faith, became a sacred ritual that Muslims reenact every year during Hajj and Umrah, known as the Sa'i. Each step she took echoed her belief that Allah's mercy is near even when the world offers no solution. When her strength was at its end and her eyes could no longer find hope, Allah's mercy descended in the form of a miracle. The angel Gabriel appeared and struck the ground near the infant Isma'il, and from that barren land water burst forth, the Zamzam well. The spring that flowed from the desert sands was not just water, it was divine reward for human endurance, for a mother's faith, and for the patience that defied despair. That single moment turned the desolation of Makkah into a place of life, a center of divine blessing that would one day host the house of Allah, the Kaaba. Zamzam water remains, to this day, a symbol of Allah's generosity and a reminder that every struggle endured for his sake is never forgotten. Pilgrims from every corner of the world drink from Zamzam not just to quench their thirst, but to draw spiritual strength from Hagar's faith. Each drop tells the story of her tears, her hope, and the divine response that followed. Allah transformed her loneliness into legacy, her trial into triumph, and her name into eternal remembrance. Her struggle also teaches that divine reward is not always immediate, but it is always certain. Hagar could not have known that from her, and her son would arise the lineage of the final prophet Muhammad. PBUH. See, the city that once witnessed her sorrow became the holiest city on earth. Her perseverance became part of every believer's spiritual journey. Every pilgrim who walks between Safa and Marwa revives her faith, honors her sacrifice, and renews the message that Allah's mercy never fails the patient. Hagar's story reveals a timeless truth. When humans reach their limits, that is, when divine help begins. Her steps between Safa and Marwa are the footsteps of faith that echo through history, reminding believers that no hardship is wasted when endured for the sake of Allah. Her life stands as a radiant symbol of divine reward for human struggle. A testament that faith transforms deserts into springs, sorrow into legacy, and despair into everlasting hope. Hagar, PBUH, known in Islam as Hagar, is one of the most remarkable yet often overlooked figures in the history of monotheism. Her story is not only about endurance and motherhood, but about faith that transcends human limitation. She was not just a servant or a secondary character in the story of Prophet Ibrahim AS. She was a chosen woman through whom Allah established a legacy that continues to shape the faith of millions. Her life, marked by sacrifice and divine trust, represents the silent strength behind one of the greatest spiritual civilizations in human history. Hagar's journey began when she was gifted to Prophet Abraham's AS and eventually became the mother of his son, Isma'il AS. When Allah commanded Ibrahim to leave Hagar and their infant son in the barren valley of Makkah, it was not an act of neglect or cruelty. It was a divine test meant to reveal the power of faith and the unseen wisdom of Allah. The image of a mother alone in an empty desert, holding her crying child while facing scorching heat and endless sand, is one of the most powerful in sacred history. Yet, in her loneliness, Hagar did not complain or rebel. Instead, she trusted that Allah would never abandon her. Her heart remained firm even when logic and sight offered no hope. As her water ran out and her child's cries grew louder, Hagar's motherly instinct pushed her to run desperately between the two hills of Safa and Marwa, searching for any sign of help. Her running was not merely a physical act. It was a spiritual reflection of every believer's struggle between despair and faith. Each step she took declared that faith is not passive. It is a movement, a search, an effort, even when the outcome is unseen. And it was precisely through that act of sincere striving that Allah's mercy manifested. The spring of Zamzam burst forth beneath her son's feet, bringing life where there had been death, and turning the desolate desert into a sacred oasis. That moment changed history. The site where Hagar stood became the foundation of the city of Makkah, the spiritual heart of Islam. Every year, millions of Muslims reenact her journey between Safa and Marwa during the pilgrimage of Hajj, not as a mere ritual, but as an act of remembrance, a declaration that faith and perseverance can transform even the harshest trials into divine blessings. Through this eternal act, Hagar's story continues to live in the footsteps of every pilgrim who walks those hills, symbolizing the unbreakable bond between human effort and divine assistance. What makes Hagar the forgotten matriarch of monotheism is that her role was foundational yet often unseen. In many traditions, she was reduced to a background figure, but in Islam, she was elevated as a woman of deep spiritual rank. She was the mother of Isma'il's AS, through whom came Prophet Muhammad, a PBUH, the final messenger of Allah. Thus, from her lineage arose the completion of the message of monotheism that began with Ibrahim's AS. Her patience and trust were not just personal virtues. They were the roots from which the message of Islam blossomed centuries later. Hagar teaches us that greatness does not always come from visibility or position. Sometimes it comes from faith in the unseen, from perseverance in silence, and from devotion that does not seek recognition. Her story is a timeless reminder that Allah sees the unseen struggles, hears the unspoken prayers, and rewards those who trust Him when all doors seem closed. Through her, we learn that true strength is not in control, but in surrender, not in power, but in patience, not in having everything, but in believing when you have nothing. Hagar's faith turned the emptiness of a desert into the birthplace of divine history, making her the true matriarch of faith, one who transformed human despair into everlasting hope. The story of Hagar's PBUH is one of the most powerful lessons in faith that transcends time, geography, and hardship. When Prophet Ibrahim's AS left her and their infant son Isma'il, AS, in the barren valley of Makkah, there was no water, no shelter, and no sign of life. The decision was not his own desire, but a command from Allah. Hagar, although filled with maternal concern, did not protest out of disbelief. Instead, she asked one question that defined her unshakable faith. Has Allah commanded you to do this? When Ibrahim AS nodded, she replied, then He will not abandon us. In that single moment, she showed what it means to trust Allah beyond the limits of human understanding. As the scorching sun blazed and her supplies ran out, Hagar's situation grew desperate. She could not bear to see her baby cry of thirst, so she placed him on the ground and began running between two nearby hills, Safa and Marwa, searching for any sign of help. She did this 7 times, her heart torn between fear and faith. Each step she took symbolized the internal struggle between panic and patience, between the seen and the unseen. Her body grew weaker, but her faith remained steadfast. And just when her human effort reached its end, Allah's mercy descended in the most miraculous way. The angel Gabriel appeared, striking the ground beneath Isma'il, and the water of Zamzam began to flow endlessly. That spring was not just a miracle of survival, it was a divine message. It proved that when human strength fails, divine help begins. Hagar's PBUH story teaches that faith is not about seeing the path clearly, but about walking forward even when the destination is hidden. She did not know where help would come from, yet she never stopped moving. Her running between Safa and Marwa became the eternal act of faith and perseverance, now immortalized in the rites of Hajj and Umrah. Every pilgrim who performs, repeats her journey, walking the same distance and carrying the same spiritual message. That Allah never forgets those who trust Him completely. Hagar's story also redefines what it means to struggle. Many assume that faith removes pain, but in truth, faith gives meaning to pain. Her tears, her exhaustion, and her loneliness were not signs of weakness, but marks of divine closeness. Allah did not stop her trial immediately. He allowed it to unfold so that her heart could rise above fear and fully embrace reliance on Him. Her story reminds believers that trials are not punishments but invitations, opportunities to witness Allah's mercy in the most unexpected ways. In the silence of the desert, Hagar discovered that faith is not about comfort, but about connection. Her isolation became her meeting place with the divine. What appeared as abandonment was, in reality, Allah's preparation for a greater destiny, the foundation of a sacred city and a lineage of prophets. From her faith came the Kaaba, the pilgrimage, and the living symbol of submission that unites all Muslims today. The eternal message of Hagar's journey is that true faith begins where human sight ends. When you see no escape, no help, and no solution, Allah's plan is already in motion. Like Hagar, every believer faces moments of drought, emotional, spiritual, or physical, but those who keep running, praying, and believing will find their own Zamzam. Her legacy whispers to every heart, do your part with full sincerity and leave the outcome to Allah. For the one who trusts Him, the desert will bloom, and from the hardest test will flow the sweetest water of mercy.